So good evening all. We welcome you all for the program. It is our webinar on spirituality and building emotional resilience. We welcome all the participants from different spheres, psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, other mental health professionals. We welcome you all. We request you to keep your mic in mute. All your queries will be answered at last. If there's any difficulty, you can message us in chat. Okay. So this webinar is jointly organized by Indian Psychiatric Society, Spirituality and Mental Health Task Force. The Spirituality and Mental Health Task Force, the Indian Psychiatric Society's group has chairperson Dr. Avdesh Sharma, who is the speaker today, and co-chair is Dr. Srikumar Mukherjee. And I am the convener of Indian Psychiatric Society Spirituality and Mental Health Task Force. I am Dr. Kailash here. I am an associate professor from Chettinad Medical College. We are organizing this along with Chennai Psychiatric Society, the president Dr. Shivabalan, and we also thank all the EC members of Chennai Psychiatric Society for helping us in organizing the conference. It is jointly also organized along with Department of Psychiatry and Students Counseling Center of Chettinad Academy of Research and Education. So now we move on to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Avdesh Sharma. He's done his DPM and MD from NIMHANS, Bangalore. He is a consultant well-being psychiatrist with over 25 years of clinical practice in Delhi. He has been the international lead on public education for the World Psychiatric Association, co-chair of the World Psychiatric Association section on spirituality and mental health, and also chair of the Spirituality and Mental Health Task Force of Indian Psychiatric Society. He is an international distinguished fellow of American Psychiatric Association, past president of Indian Association of Private Psychiatry and Indian Psychiatric Society North Zone and Indian Association of Private Psychiatry. He has received several awards for his contribution in the field of mental health, especially in public speaking, public education. He is also the founder of Mind Vision Enterprises, managing trustee Rahat Charitable Medical Research Trust, founder director Better Minds, and Mind Specialist. Sir, you can take over now. I will be stopping my share screen option. You can share your screen, sir.
Welcome. It's a pleasure. I partly belong to Chennai because I'm married to, I'm the Mappale of Chennai, actually. My wife is a Chennai from a similar profession. She's a clinical psychologist. But it's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be talking to all of you. And I would say that in many ways, the journey started professionally from Chennai. This was 1994 in Indian Psychiatric Society. We had the first, we organized during the IPS annual conference, the first workshop on spirituality and mental health. And I remember at that point of time, this is 25 years back, that the IPS top brass said, look, I don't think it's going to get any people to come to the conference. Nobody is going to be interested. Everybody is looking for something to do with biological psychiatry. So I said, okay, doesn't matter, we'll try it. And we did. And we had a huge response. We had people overflowing. And I would say that personally also for me, the journey started from that time. Now, let me also share that at this point of time, what we are going to be talking about is something where there is a huge body of evidence. I'm also happy from what Dr. Kailash shared with me that a lot of people who are very senior mental health professionals, and yet at the same time, we also have those who are just starting their journey, residents. So I think it's a good idea for us to have an open discussion about this particular and see what is its place in the field of mental health. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a presentation. I'll not make it very long or boring with references because uh, whatever you want, I'll be willing to, through Dr. Kailash, send it to you. And we would love it in case you are willing to join the section of Indian Psychiatric Society. And if you're a member of the Indian Psychiatric Society, then also the World Psychiatric Association section on spirituality and mental health. And thank you very much, all of you, and thank you especially to the Chennai Psychiatric Society, and thank you very much to the Chettinad Academy of Research and Education and the Student Counseling Wing of CARE. Now, there is a connection, if you were to see. Have you ever wondered as to how far back, as far as modern medicine is concerned, how far back do we go? You know, it's just about 100 years that the first medication for modern medicine, from modern medicine, came in for mental disorders. And if we were to, even today, think of the dimensions of preventive mental health and health promotion, there is hardly anything that we are able to offer except counseling and except in vulnerable populations to proactively try and reduce the chances of people developing problems. But in terms of people's mental well-being, and that's why I don't know whether you saw that I have deliberately put my name as consultant well-being psychiatrist. It's not a degree that I have earned. It's a predisposition in a way that unless you have the dimension of well-being in the field of mental health, we are leaving out large populations. And anyway, you may be knowing that the 2016 survey that was done by NIMHANS, the National Mental Health Survey, which talks about almost 75 to 90% of the people having severe to moderate mental disorders, not being able to access treatment. And many reasons have been given for that. One of them, of course, is stigma. The other is lack of resources. And I have often wondered that if there are so many people, because what we are projecting is that about 13 to 17 crore of the population is having mental disorders. So what is happening to the rest of the population? And I think over there, we need to remember that dimension, which is called spirituality, and I'm going to just come shortly to what we mean by that. That is something which is helping people to an extent. It definitely mitigates as far as the severity of illness is concerned. There are populations where this helps people to cope better. And it also helps people get integrated back into the community that they come from. Now, this is the World Psychiatric Association's position statement on spirituality and religion in psychiatry. This was done actually in 2014, and then it was approved by the WP Executive Committee. I'm going to be requesting Dr. Kailash to send the entire two-page brief statement to all of you because it talks about how many studies are there. And there are more than about 3,000 studies, empirical studies, which have been published in major journal of psychiatry or mental health. And where some of the key things are that the mental health professionals need to be aware of the kind of the population that they are serving, what they feel about how much spirituality or religion is contributing to the disorder that they are suffering from. Also, that what are they feeling is the way that they should be treated, which means should it be only medication, should it be counseling, should it be also certain of the spiritual or religious principles. And the mental health professionals should also be aware of what is happening in the community in terms of their being able to get other help than from just the modern medicine. And lastly, to be able to offer it to them in conjunction with the modern medicine treatment, even if they are getting treatment from them. So which means the integration should happen. And at a very practical level, as we just discussed, the kind of resource uh, that problem we have anywhere in the world, including in a country like America, which has about 1/4 the population of India and has about 10 times the number of psychiatrists than India. It's the same. You go to Australia, where there is number of mental health professionals is about 5 times that of India. It's the same. So we have to realize that the resource crunch is there. And you also go to some of the African countries where there may be less than a dozen psychiatrists for the entire countries. So some of these principles, that's why, need to be kept in mind. Now that brings us to a very key question. What is spirituality? You know, spirituality and religion, many people equate. Basically, all religious practices started with basic principles of spirituality. And if you bringing down to the minimum common factors, then they are basically about being good. And also it means that, you should be able to live your life according to certain principles. And those principles are actually enshrined in many of the religious texts. But spirituality basically means that there is something beyond what we see as the physical body. And it is a level of consciousness which helps us to find our purpose, to find our higher selves, to be able to define what the reason for me being here is, and to be able to help me in any kind of a crisis in case that happens. And how should I conduct my life, not only for myself, but for all those around. So religious texts may have spiritual principles, and yet many of the people who are spiritual may not follow a religion. And that's what makes it very, very different in today's context, that there are a lot of people who may call themselves atheist, and yet at the same time, they follow certain principles which make them a better human being, which is basically the purpose of being spiritual. We'll come to today's topic of building emotional resilience. And in the end, I'm going to connect it with spiritual principles. I have put specifically the word building in a different color because, a large number of people feel that the ability to bounce back, which is what resilience is all about, is something that you may be born with. So some people may have a personality or a way of being able to handle situations by which they can do better than others, and it's a inborn kind of a trait. So you either have it or not have it. And yet research in the last about 25 years has shown that this is a learned skill. This is something that you can very easily pick up over a period of time. And there are very specific tools and techniques by which you can do that. And if you have a basic amount of it, you can learn to build on it. Also, what we found is that if you can teach it by role modeling, and if you can teach it early in childhood, it's much easier in terms of learning. And also over a period of time, it comes in much more handy because then it's not like any other skill. It's not something that you have to deal on your previous patterns of behavior and relearn something else. Now there is this concept now, which is called as, there was intelligence quotient, and then there emotional quotient, and then there was spiritual quotient, and now there's also talk about resilience quotient. This has come in because of the fact that many people across the world are facing a lot of personal or external crisis. Now, external crisis could be economic, they could be man-made, or they could be natural disasters. The numbers of wars that are going on, the racial issues that are happening, and also in the last few years, if you have seen, maybe because of the climate change, the number of natural disasters that have been coming. And that's why those people who have a higher resilient quotient, they are able to live this. That tough times do not last, but tough people do. What we also find is that sometimes you have resilient families, which means that they are able to cope with situations far better than others. And it is not a question of their being able to have resources in terms of physical resources, in terms of money, in terms of position or power, but sometimes in terms of their ability to deal with the situation. And especially because they have dealt with many difficult situations, they are able to handle them far better. And similarly, you have resilient societies. Because of that, for example, you would find a country like Japan, which has been getting earthquakes much more than any other country in the world. They have been able to get their population to emotionally proof themselves from the effects of earthquakes. So even if there is something that happens, they are very quickly able to move on. Similarly, countries that have been going through war, for us who have not seen war, and we are lucky, but there are societies where war has been going on for decades. And those societies have been able to build on whatever happens in terms of sometimes half a city being destroyed or no resources at all, but they are able to move on. So these are things which can be then translated from an individual onto families and then subsequently the societies. Now, we have been listening to a lot of things about the herd immunity, especially in the context of corona, which means that if a number of people will have the illness, or if they would have the virus inside themselves, then they would be able to create an immunity which would also protect others. So similarly, there is this concept of herd resilience, where if a certain critical number of people are able to deal with the crisis, then they would be able to be the buffer for the rest of the society. And that's something that, as a preventive measure for the future, and especially because there has been a lot of talk now about the post-corona mental health pandemic, that because of different reasons, there are going to be whether economic or job related or fear of the second wave, etc. So one needs to be emotionally proof from many such situations. And if we can build the entire society's ability to deal with difficult situations, then we would be able to rise like phoenix from the ashes. Now, basically, what does resilience mean? It means it's a resourceful response to a challenge, and resources which may be there or resources which we are able to find through innovative means. So there is a challenge, but once the challenge is there, you can either go down with it, or you can learn to find ways and means and the resources by which you can respond to the challenge. Now, the second is the ability to leap back. The typical way to describe would be what you have seen. Tall trees like coconut trees, they have learned to bend whenever there is a huge wind. They don't break. But anything which is very solid gets uprooted. So the ability to come back to either your previous functioning or to be able to uh, go beyond that, actually. That's again something which is supposed to be one of the ingredients of resilience. And the third is the ability to recover quickly, like you would have for physical illnesses. Many of the people are able to understand that there is a challenge. They are able to ponder over it, find resourceful ways of being able to handle it, and then to recover and move on. The typical example would be that if there is a crisis, let's say the crisis of water in Chennai that happened, or there was the floods that happened. So there were some people who became totally helpless. And there were others who would say, all right, what can I do at this point of time? And those became the heroes because they were able to recover quickly from what they were going through. And yet they were able to move on and be able to not only help themselves, but others. Now, I'm going to one by one describe some of the ingredients, and then I'm going to talk about some of the tools, and then we are going to talk about what is the benefit from various kinds of emotional resilience. There is this concept of control, which means you find out how much you can control a situation. What are the things about a situation that we can control? And then we challenge that situation. We try and find ways by which you can, maybe in small small ways, or completely full on. There is this ad of Salman Khan, I think, where he is standing on top of a mountain, almost falling off. And of course, it's the ad of a particular cold drink. And in Hindi, the word says, "Dar ke aage jeet hai," which basically means that beyond fear, there is victory. So when you start challenging a particular situation, you start feeling on top of it. And the third ingredient is the ability to commit yourself to it on a long-term basis. It cannot be a flash in the pan. It's something that you find ways of dealing with, and then you commit yourself to dealing with it till it has completely vanished. And the courage to do it. The reason for putting communication here is that in most of the challenging situations where emotional resilience is required, whether in a family or in a society, you need to communicate with others. When you feel that you are alone, your ability to deal with the situation comes down. And when you are able to communicate by connecting with others, which is the next one, the connection, then you have a bond, and you are able to not only learn from others, but you are able to get their support. And that's where cooperation comes in. Most of the situations, and at this point of time, especially for the COVID crisis, time and again, there has been this talk that whether it is between states, or it is between countries, or it is between individuals, or it is between government and private medical colleges, you have to cooperate. And the higher the external threat for an emotional resilience, to be able to do it, more and more cooperation is required. And I must say that this is something, as a medical professional, we learn. We are not taught, but we learn as we go along. Because you cannot function alone, number one. Number two, in the situation where there are deaths happening around you, the ability to keep yourself stable emotionally comes in very handy. Because otherwise, where the rest of the population just thinking that they may have corona will probably be so fearful or have certain kind of psychiatric problems, the medical fraternity, which includes all in the medical fraternity. They are able to deal with the situation, sometimes by putting their emotions aside, and sometimes because over a period of time they have become emotionally resilient. And this next C of care, when you start caring not only for yourselves, but you start caring that you need to come out on top of this situation, and you have compassion for others who may be going through a similar situation, then your commitment to the entire thing also increases. And then you need to find different ways, sometimes resources, sometimes different way of doing it. Like in the present crisis of corona, what is happening is that newer and newer forms of treatments which have not been tried out before are also being tried out. So that's a creativity and different ways of being able to contain something. I think once the physical threat is over, then to be able to deal with the emotional resilience, as a society, we will have to come up with creative ways. And once we have done that, then to remember that to survive, we need little. But you can keep on expanding that list. And the minute you expand that list in terms of your needs or sometimes greeds, then in that case, you start feeling that things are not right. You need more things should have uh, been coming to you. So even if you have, there is a feeling of have not, which is the enemy of emotional resilience. I'll go on to the next set of things, which are the tools of creating emotional resilience in oneself. One is recovery, which means that you very quickly recover from whatever is the external or internal threat. A lot of times the external threat is much less, but a feeling that something terrible may happen makes it worse. So the ability to be able to understand the real nature of threat and the amount that it is there, and then to recover from it. And the earlier that you recover, the faster you will be able to resolve to find a newer purpose. Because by and large, any kind of small or big challenge that we have, especially to our mental health, requires us to change the direction. And that redirection requires either the way we think, we emote, or the actions that we take. And the energy, if it is going in that direction, then it is much easier for us to recover completely. And these are the different ways and the tools by which we can become emotionally resilient. Now, how does the process happen? These are the 4 steps, and I'm, for purposes of you being able to remember, I've put it as C's and R's, and now S's. First is self-awareness, which means that you become aware of yourself, your own strengths. You're kind of calling it a SWOT analysis, where you are able to find out what are the emotional threats that you feel. At the same time, within yourself and around you, what are the things that you can depend on. And once you have become self-aware, the second step, which is a very, very important step, is self-esteem. To remember that you may have dealt with similar situations or sometimes even bigger situations in the past, and thus you have the ability to bounce back. Because in a crisis, it's very, very easy to uh, start feeling completely helpless. So once you're able to have that awareness of yourself, do the analysis, and then feel that you are powerful enough to be able to deal with that situation. And if you become selfless, most of us start feeling terrible if we have to be in a situation where we have to fend only for ourselves. And then you feel that the stakes are very high. Once you're able to deal with the situation and you're able to give back, you are able to help somebody else, then that's something where you actually are teaching another person, either by words or by role model, as to how they could deal with the situation. And lots of time we learn in that process. And lastly, this entire process is to become a better you, to be able to receive that self-actualization by which you are able to come out stronger. You are able to feel that you are able to deal with a situation like this in future, and then you are ready for the next any such situation that happens. And this is actually an automatic process. It's a kind of a feedback loop which keeps on going again and again and again. Now, the outcome of all this, and one of the ways of checking out whether you are becoming emotionally resilient, is that you start having hope in even difficult situations, because you have done it before and you know that you'll be able to do it again. The healing happens, which means the amount of disturbance emotionally that you would have had in the past may not happen. And the third being happiness. A lot of people, even during lockdown, even when there was a external crisis, started feeling a kind of sense of liberation, which was because they felt that they are controlled in their own situations. They didn't have the time, or they didn't give it enough time in the past. But many of the people who were, because of lockdown, and even if they were working from home, they were able to find ways and means of feeling happy, even when they were to face difficult situations. And that leads to a higher purpose for yourself, not only yourself, many a times for the society at large, which again, in this big kind of a crisis for the entire country and the world, we have seen that while there are people who have been undergoing a lot of psychological issues, there is another set of people who have risen to the occasion, who have started giving back to the society, who have started contributing to the nation. So you really in life, and it gives you wholeness, the ability to understand that we are all interdependent, and the fact that if I make a mistake, others suffer from it. So the entire process of healing, sometimes what is called as Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which means that the whole world is one, which is a truth. Many of us have realized that we are so interconnected, not only with ourselves, but also with nature and other human beings. Now, last set of things, very quick recap of how do you build it. So if we have it, great. We can always build on it. If you don't have it, how one can start and build it. First is creating a physical resilience. If you don't have a healthy body, the ability to feel positively also comes down. So in this, we have proper sleep, food, exercise, immunity builders, whether these are various kinds of vitamins, or now there is this issue about many of the Ayush products, especially related to nature, which are there. Very importantly, management of diseases, physical diseases or psychological problems. Because if you are not able to think clearly, or if you're too involved because there's a physical illness, you will not be able to create the kind of emotional atmosphere for yourself. And addictions in that would be a complete no-no, because they may numb you and they may make you feel that temporarily you are on top of things, but all of us know that that is a false reality that during addiction people live with. These are some of the psychological, spiritual, and level of consciousness shifts that need to be happening. They sometimes look very difficult or big, but once you understand the process and you start doing it, it's not that difficult. First is changing the belief system. A belief system that whatever is happening is terrible, or that the whole humanity is going to go down, or there is no way out. Yes, there might be situations which need solutions, and yet it is not the end of the world. There needs to be a shift in consciousness for this. And for some people, that shift can happen with nature. For some, it can happen with children. For some, it can be through meditation or chanting or mindfulness. There needs to be a shift in conscious way of thinking and emotions. We have a lot of subconscious processes that are happening, and they break through into the consciousness. And yet, whatever we can access through conscious thinking and emotions, what we can experience on a day-to-day basis, we need to shift that if it is causing us any kind of disturbance. And lastly, a shift in the vocabulary of thinking and speaking. Oh my God, it's terrible. Now, when you say that, you're sending out a message to yourself that it's something which is not manageable or insurmountable. And the kind of self-talk many of times that we do, and many a times we talk to others, or our thinking patterns, which have happened over a period of time. It's a kind of a programming that happens in the brain. If we can start becoming aware of it and changing that vocabulary, for this we need to check our mental diet, which means on an everyday basis, what are my thoughts? Our emotional diet, which means everyday basis, what are the kind of emotions that I have? What are the reasons for having those emotions? Are they in any way necessary at this point of time? Can I let go of some of them? And checking our information diet. How many WhatsApp forwards that I see, how many times do I watch those news where they just have a ticker which is going on as to which country, how many cases have happened, and whether on that you have people who are fighting with each other politically or otherwise. So what is going inside me is what makes my belief system and feeds into my mental and emotional diet. So becoming aware of that helps a lot in building our emotional resilience. Checking our intra and interpersonal relationships. Interpersonal is something that a large number of people may not even be. The interpersonal relationships, especially with people around, because if they are going to be causing me distress, then I would not be able to deal with so many things. So understanding that on a day-to-day basis, what is it within my environment, within the family, especially, and at workplace, which is causing me distress. Being in reflection on a day-to-day basis. A large number of people find that sometime in the morning, 15 to 20 minutes, and in the evening, call it meditativeness or call it prayers, it helps them tremendously. Being in the here and now, which means being mindful, not allowing too much of past spilling into the present, and not trying to project too much into the future, because anyway, I mean, as a CBT technique also, we know that that is something that we are not able to handle beyond a certain point of time, to cutting it down to only being in the present, being mindful, and also realizing that when you look back in life, a lot of things which looked insurmountable were there for a short period of time, and then they passed. So many challenging situations are just a bend and not the end. And this is a very basic principle of building emotional resilience, because that means that you are able to cut down the total things that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis in yourself. And these are 4 very, very simple ways. One, which is called putting a full stop. When we are writing something, at the end of the sentence, you have to put a full stop. Only then a new sentence can start. If you don't do that, it's all garbled. So similarly for thoughts, similarly for situations. At some point of time, one has to say, okay, that's enough. It's done. I move on to the next one. Being a trustee, which means that you don't take on too much of burden on yourself about any situation, especially if it doesn't concern you directly. And even if it concerns you, try and do your best, and yet at the same time not get bogged down with it. The SOS technique is that in any situation, instead of reacting immediately, just step back, observe the situation, and then based on what you find is the best way of dealing with it, steer it towards that. And lastly, but possibly the most important, is that situations are at one level. And if you rise above it, you may find that it no longer exists. Many of the things that we feel, whether it is job losses in future or economic problems or second wave, are not things that may affect me immediately at this point of time. So I can rise above it and think of other ways by which I can make my and others' life much more better and resilient. And for this, these are 5 simple ways. Many of you may be connecting with your higher self or a higher power. Some people call it God. Some people give it different names. Some people who are atheists may say that, no, I'm good enough with, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy. I'm just good enough to connect with my highest self. Many people find connecting with nature very, very energizing and charging them enough to take on more challenges. The affirmations and visualization, which means the self-talk that we do with ourselves, and the situations that we visualize. If you visualize that you're coming out victorious, if you visualize, and that, that's not just make-believe. These are creating patterns in the brain. We have found that, for example, many of the artists have played a melody in their mind before it comes out to the world. Or similarly, with people who are into sports, they visualize themselves in situations and they keep talking to themselves. So having right affirmations and visualizations. Gratitude makes you definitely believe that you are in a better situation than many others, and being grateful for that then reduces the problems that you may be feeling. They may or may not be there, but you may be feeling, and that reduces the impact that it may have on you. And when you are altruistic, there are studies and studies of how altruistic behavior has helped people, because they are able to divert their energies onto something which is higher than themselves. And the process of helping another person also helps themselves. Now, we have been practicing something called Raj Yoga meditative lifestyle, especially taught by the Brahma Kumaris, which talks about many of these principles, and the World Psychiatric Association. Also, we have been talking about many of these principles, which are mainly principles of being able to proactively deal with situations and building your emotional resilience, so that you are able to not only prevent diseases, but you are also able to promote better mental and emotional health. This is the reason, I think, why we are here. If we believe that there is something called spirit or consciousness, then we are that spirit who has materialized to engage in spiritualizing the matter around us, which means that whatever we do is with a certain sense of purpose, which is a higher purpose than just surviving. And the reason for that is that while some of us believe that we have an occasional spiritual experience, but actually I at least believe today that we are basically spiritual beings who are also having a human experience. Thank you very much for a very, very patient hearing. I must appreciate your patience to be able to sit silently. And thank you very much. And I'll be very happy to take any questions as decided by Dr. Kailash.
Good evening, sir. Can I just ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Good evening. Your presentation was fantastic. Really, it so many things we learned. I just want you to say the last slide that you visited. We are spirit materialized, engaged with spiritualization, spiritualizing matter. We are a spiritual being that.
Yeah. Your voice got cut. So I heard the first part only.
Okay. Just wanted you to go over the last slide. The last slide, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember the last slide. Yes. Thank you.
Yes.
So you're saying that how are we spiritualizing the matter around us?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. You know, human beings are made up of two parts. There is human and there is being. Now, human comes from the word humus, which means the earth. The principle that we are made of the 5 elements. And the fact of the matter is that when consciousness is gone, the being is gone, then the body cannot function. Now, when the human being is able to raise their consciousness, then through that, your acts, you're able to raise the consciousness of others around. And you're able to actually also raise the consciousness of the nature. We have seen it happen in last 3 months. A lot of problems which were there with nature, whether it was pollution or it was the rivers not being very clean, we were able to, by stopping some of our negative actions and by many people contributing to that, they were able to actually spiritualize the nature. And when all of us start thinking that we are in control and we would be able to come out of a crisis. I also saw somebody asking a question, and I'll take it right here, which was that, you know, how can you feel emotionally resilient when there is so much of problems going around? To me, that means that, you know, let's say that we have only 2 lakh people who have turned positive. Let's say there were 10 lakh more. Now, do I need to focus on those 10 lakhs who are positive from coronavirus, or the rest of the population of 130 crores who are not? In the future, there was also part of the question that, you know, in the future, we know that there would be so many problems. Even in the past, there were so many problems. And each of us actually focused on only that we had to deal with. So if we start dealing with situations which I can deal with, I improve my emotional resilience, then I start helping others to improve theirs. And then as a community, we can rise above it. If we all start saying, oh my God, so many numbers, so many people increasing, and thus future is going to be terrible, then as a community, as a country, and as a world, we are only focused on what terrible things will happen. And we know in case of Sensex that if you have a bad sentiment, it pulls Sensex down. So I think even for economic things, if we start thinking more resiliently, we would pull the Sensex up.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Sir, we have a question from Dr. Bhavna Baba. She says, in Western psychology, we often see how our current circumstances are embedded in the past. However, as per various spiritual texts, our past makes us who we are today, and we must center ourselves in the present. How we reconcile these two views?
Okay. You know, the past in terms of patterns obviously makes us keep going back to the same patterns. And that's what Western psychology has taken up. That whether it is your childhood experiences, or it is how you have behaved in the past, or what situations you have dealt with and how you have dealt with, is going to come into the present. But that means that in some ways we are saying that we are doomed to do that ever and ever again. So one way of the Eastern thoughts as they are is that, okay, you disconnect from whatever in the past is today bothering you. And you learn not to put too many things into the future, because that's what you don't have control on at this point of time. You start working with yourself today. And once you create a different positive pattern of dealing with situations today, you can either let go of the past situations or let go of the past memories which are coming into the present, or you can actually delete them. Because, like we are now interacting, I'm interacting with you. There are many other people, but I'm not focusing on them at the moment. So similarly, in our mind, we may have many situations of the past, and yet I can learn to put them aside and deal with the present. And if I'm able to deal with it better, then the past will either look after itself or I would be able to let go of it.
Thank you, sir. I think Dr. Shabri Sridhar, you can ask your doubt.
Good evening, sir. Very well presented presentation, especially that is much needed for the current situation where people are undergoing lots of stress. I am Dr. Shabri Sridhar, sir. I am currently the HOD in charge of the Department of Psychiatry, Chettinad Medical College, colleague of Kailash. Sir, I have two questions to ask. The first question is, other than spirituality, is there any ways or means by which we are emotional resilient? This is the only way by which can we build up our emotional resilience. That is one part. The second question is, by saying spirituality, aren't we trying to bring in religion into it, directly or indirectly? We can there be any scientific basis which we can build up, like they did for mindfulness? They totally removed the Buddhism from it, and it was presented to us in more scientific way. Likewise, the spirituality that we are talking about, can we do it in a more scientific way? These are the two questions that I want to ask you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sridhar. First, thank you for hosting me today. And it's been an absolute pleasure. Second is that, yes, when you talked about the fact that, can we deal with these kind of situations, then is it only religion? Is it only spirituality? And can we de-link religion? The reason for de-linking religion should be that there could be many negative coping ways by which religion interferes with the positive mental health of a person. We know that. That's one. Second is that, and we need to be cognizant of that. Second is that many a time the agenda of mental health gets hijacked by a religious organization, by their own agendas. And we should at least see as mental health professionals that while the interface is good, but that shouldn't happen, because that would be possibly to the detriment of the mental health of a person. Now, the concepts that I have spoken of are actually concepts of positive psychology, which today is gaining big ground, positive psychiatry and positive psychology. And in last about 20-25 years, like mindfulness, there have been a lot of studies which have been done on prayers. Prayers for yourself and prayers for others. They have been done for meditation. They have been done for concepts like connectedness, social connectedness. Now, these were principles of good living. Because the concept of positive psychology wasn't there. It's only now, unfortunately, it's coming from the West. So many of us are saying, okay, it's fine. It can be a part of our curriculum. Till some time back, it was the dopamine and the serotonin and set another hypothesis. We should be able to de-link some of the concepts. You know, the problem, and I can share that problem with you, and you're the HOD, maybe you can find a way out of it. In Indian Psychiatric Society and actually in World Psychiatric Society, what we are finding is that, you know, to do a study, you need basic funding. At least you need one person who will be able to carry out a study. Nobody is willing to fund that. You can't get it from any of the pharmaceutical companies. You can try from philanthropic organizations, etc. And you know, it becomes very difficult, especially when you want to do something like a double-blind kind of a trial. But mind you, and I'm going to send an ebook to Dr. Kailash, because I keep referring back to him because he's my only contact. But there was a book which was which came out from Indian Psychiatric Society. It is a joint publication of Indian Psychiatric Society and Raj Yoga Education and Research Foundation. I edited that book, but it's been written by about 40 top mental health experts, including the present and the past, the future and the past president of WPA, Afzal Javed and Dinesh Pugra, who have talked about various studies that are there, and it's a scientific publication. So spirituality need not be a part of religion. If it is in a way where there is, we are able to request a religious institution that you keep religious practices out. But if there are spiritual practices, like let's say somebody is wanting to have mantra, or somebody wants to read the Quran and that helps them, and nothing else about the religion, that should be fine. In the Western countries, especially in countries like UK, Australia, New Zealand, they are supposed to have a chaplain who's there as a part of the mental health team. And they are able to work together. So something similar, because, you know, at the end of the day, if we are going to say it is non-biological, then we have to find the resources which are there in the community already. And also we have to find culturally accepted way that the population can relate to. So I think as mental health professionals, we can have that interface to ensure that nothing negative, and especially for treatment seeking, happens from religious organizations, and yet these spiritually positive principles, especially of positive psychology, can benefit the population. So Kailash, please remind me, I made a promise of sending the WPO position statement and the ebook on spirituality and mental health.
Sure, sir. After that, we'll circulate it to all the participants. We'll also circulate the link of the presentation after it gets uploaded in YouTube to all the participants. That also will be able to do. I think I have no other people raising the hand. I just wanted to ask you about one thing, sir, in person. Like, does spirituality necessitate that we believe in a higher power? Should we believe in higher power for spirituality to help us?
Yes and no. If you don't have a belief and you're forced to, it will not work. But many a times, you know, it's like, let me put it in a slightly crude manner. Let's say that somebody is an orphan and he doesn't have a father. He has learned to be on his own, and he has learned to manage on his own. And whenever there is a requirement, that person is able to find their own strength. But let's say that there is another person who has a father, and for everything he goes back to father and he takes advice or he takes help in a positive manner. I think it's a similar situation with God. If you don't believe, you don't need to have it. You don't need to believe in a higher power.
Okay, sir.
Dr. Avdesh, you're on mute again. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Yeah, it's back
okay,
again.
yeah, sorry, got muted. So
Sorry.
I was just saying that, if you have a belief in a higher power, it's very easy for people to connect and take, it's like you being a part of the Chettinad Medical College.
Yes.
So you can go into their library. Today, if I want to, probably you won't allow me, or they'll ask me for a card. So if I believe in a higher power and I'm able to go back to it, it helps. If you don't have, it doesn't mean that you are excluded. You can still be very spiritual without believing in a higher power. You can get into your own resources, because all of us have learned to develop our own resources to be able to deal with situations. It's just that many a times, if you believe in a higher power, and if you have a group which also believes similarly, then your ability to deal with the situation improves, because you also have the support of that community, and also because at that point of time you're quickly able to have a reference which has been a part of you.
Okay, so there are two other people who have raised their hand.
Sure.
Renu, Dr. Renu,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
you can speak.
Am I audible, sir? Yeah. So what we have been talking about is really great. I mean, for the unstable times like this. But what my question is this, is that somewhere helpful in dealing with the teammates in a teamwork, or somebody who's been abusive to you? Can it be help somewhere? Can it be related to a teamwork also? Though we have been
Absolutely.
talking about at the individual level.
Right. No. If you saw that there was these references of connectedness or cooperation, and then when you do it as a community or you do it as a family, it always helps. So when we are doing it in the context of, and it is not in the context of Corona, it is in the context of every personal kind of a crisis that we may be going through, or any other crisis. It could be also preempting a crisis, so that you don't land up in a crisis. It's just to deal with a situation which is out of the ordinary. Now, it helps tremendously if you are calm, composed, if you become a leader in terms of taking the lead for a difficult situation. If you are, as they say, being calm in the eye of a storm, then the whole office will look towards you whenever there's a crisis. And a guy like that can't be fired, because he's too precious for the organization, or she's too precious for the organization. So it absolutely helps as far as that is concerned. As far as an abusive relationship is concerned, one has to see the level of abuse, and one has to see if it is occasional, if it is situational. So if somebody just raised the voice, for example, that also may for some people be an abuse. But if there is a physical or a sexual abuse, or if it has been going on, or if it is happening with a child, then it is absolutely not acceptable. You cannot have an emotional resilience so that you can keep on getting abused. An emotionally resilient person at that point of time actually also will say, okay, this is something not acceptable, whatever the consequences. And whatever the consequences, I'll be able to face it. At that point of time, being able to make that difference also will come from inner strength. But many a times, if you are not feeling well within yourself, if you're not feeling stable, then sometimes one may even imagine situations. And that's something that one has to be careful. But abuse is something that is totally not acceptable. It's not a part of emotional resilience.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification, sir. I mean, Dr. Kalai Selvi, are you there to ask a question?
Yes, sir, I'm there, sir. Can I ask, sir?
Yes.
Sir, I'm Dr. Kalai Selvi, postgraduate from Chetnad Institute, sir. I have a doubt to ask you, sir. Like,
Yes.
we got to see patients, like, though persons have positive and negative effect, due to change in religion, we got to see only patients who landed up having negative effects due to the change in religion, sir. Like, how does change in religion affect mental health, and how are we going to help them to overcome it?
Okay, many a times the change of religion happens not out of choice, but it is a compulsion for various reasons. Economic sometimes you want to be a part of a certain group, or sometimes the family forces you. And those consequences will always be negative because you're not going into it with a mind to gain something. Now, the first thing as a mental health professional is to help that person let go of whatever negative religious experiences that they have gone through, and then asking them to cut off completely as far as that particular person in a religion or the religion or the religious practices that may be causing them distress. In case they want to go back to a previous religion that they were a part of, if it's a possibility and they are comfortable about it and they have learned how to move away from it, that's fine. But the choice should be left to them. Many a times, because we belong to a certain religion, we may say, oh, this is better than that. And I think over there, neutrality is very, very important. Yet at the same time, in a very neutral way, you should be able to discuss the pros and cons of them. But by and large, I would say that for some time, if they can develop coping mechanisms away from any religion, that would be great. They may have coping mechanisms with other community members or family, and they are able to get that support, or to be able to get support from you as a therapist. That would help them a lot. And once they are in a better frame of mind, then at that point of time, making that choice themselves. But the choice should be left to them. And sometimes they may want to meet a religious person to make these choices clearer to themselves. If you want to and you're comfortable with it, then being a part of that process, if you can at least look after their mental health and the damage to it in a clearer way as a therapist, then you can be a part of it. Or at least they can keep you involved, or at least let you know what they are going through. Because yes, I have seen many a times myself, people having a breakdown, either because they were told that they should stop medication where they needed the medication, or they were told that modern medicine is not good when they were severely ill, or certain of their basic beliefs were challenged by a religious person. At that point of time, it becomes very difficult for an individual, and you as a therapist at least should be able to support them from all this.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
I'm so glad, Dr. Kalai Selvi, that somebody who is a resident is thinking about it. In my time, and it's not, well, it's about 45 years back in NIMHANS, but at that point of time, unfortunately, these questions were not getting asked. We were only told that schizophrenia is caused by dopamine, and that's the end of it. You give dopamine, everything would be all right. I'm so happy that you are looking at what happens in real life rather than just in books.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, one other question has come from Sunita. She wants to know, how do we self-actualize and how do we stay positive when faced with emotional abuse?
You need to first cut off emotional abuse. And sometimes I understand that may not be that easy, especially when it is happening within the families. So first is to reduce the impact on your mental and emotional health, which means that either you cut off from that person or you minimize your interactions with that person. And if possible, then you tell that person that it is something that is not acceptable or that it is harming you. If you have no choice in all these, but I personally believe that if it is an adult, then we have that choice. And especially if it is an emotional abuse, which is continuous and it has been going on for some time and it is multifaceted, then one must move away. If one has not been able to, then at least if there is no physical or sexual abuse, then one should be able to prove oneself by feeling. And that's where, I think from the self-actualization may be a later stage, but possibly the first stage would be self-awareness. What is it that is doing to you? I was showing you that slide of S's, self-awareness of, realizing what it is doing to you and what are the options that you have. Second is whatever somebody may be saying to you. And part of the emotional abuse is that you are made to look small. You are made to look terrible. So understanding that you are what you are and you're good enough in what you're doing. And third, to be able to create ways by which you can start feeling good about yourself as a person. Now, these could be at times certain hobbies. These could be certain times a me time for yourself. And sometimes it could be meditative practices. But if somebody is very disturbed, let me also tell you that, meditative practices where you sit in silence is something that is not conducive because you keep on ruminating on the negative thoughts. So doing it with the help of certain either mantras or certain guided commentaries would be useful. And talking about it with another person. Having a community where you should be able to talk about it and if they can do something about it. But I think if it has been going for some time, it's important to seek therapy, to have another perspective, to have a person with whom you can share, because in emotional abuse, the first thing that goes is your ability to think clearly. So having a therapist to be able to guide you through that would be very useful. But by and large, I would say that for emotional abuse, the earliest you can cut it off, the best it is for you and the other person.
Sir, Dr. Pradeep wants to ask, how are you incorporating spirituality, being a dynamic concept, in improving emotional resilience of patients in your day-to-day practice? Do you organize sessions focusing for the same or through any other medium?
Okay. Personally, I'm a lot into mental health awareness and especially these principles, personally or through other spiritual organizations. But in real clinical practice, I ask this question now every time that I'm seeing a client, first interview or second interview, as to what are the kind of practices that they are indulging in, which makes them feel better. And I have found over a period of time that initially there is a lot of hesitation. They feel almost as if, they are negating my treatment. If they say, oh, I have this Babaji whom I go and meet, or I actually practice mindfulness. I hope you won't mind, those kind of things. So asking that question is the worst. Second is that if you're aware of what are the practices which people usually employ and what are the positive and negative impacts on the mental health of people. For example, if somebody is coming to me with anxiety and severe panic attacks, and I ask them a question, and they say, yeah, I do a lot of pranayama every day. So ask them which kind of pranayama. Because there are many studies now which are proven that Bhastika and Kapalbhati, which are two very fast kind of breathing practices, actually cause or precipitate hypertension, anxiety, and panic attacks. So if I don't ask that question, I won't know. I'll keep on increasing the dosage of medication and they'll keep on doing those practices and worsening their condition. Similarly, if somebody who's having depression, I would ask them, are you doing something? And they say, yes, I sit in front of God for 2 hours every day. And I know that at that point of time, if the person is severely depressed, he will only be having a lot of suicidal thoughts maybe. So becoming aware of them and being able to guide them at one level. Second, I am aware of in my community around me, people who are practitioners of a spiritual lifestyle. And I know that those are people who would not ask the patient to stop medication. They will not say something against medication if it is necessary. And they would be able to complement in terms of a lifestyle thing if I'm not comfortable with it. I understand that most of us are not comfortable with it. Although at this point of time, as most of you know, that even NIMHANS has a group which is working on yoga and meditation, and they have a separate department now where the director, Dr. Gangadhar, is actually leading it along with the Ayush Ministry from the Government of India. So I would offer that to clients in case they want to, then they can take it. If they don't want to, that's fine. But at least my becoming aware, it's like somebody is using medication for other medical disorders. And if I'm not even aware of them, then in that case, there would be clash between different medication. So I think any other practice which is impinging positively or negatively on the mental health of any individual or client, we should be aware of it. The trick is asking a question in a non-threatening manner, being aware yourself of the various dimensions of spiritual and religious practices. It doesn't take long. It takes less than many of the other CMEs that we do. And once you at least have that working knowledge, you're able to offer to your client. And I have found that by and large, the clients are very happy that there is a person who's willing to openly talk about what else is going on in their life.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
One
you.
more clarification from Mr. Basavarajappa. Where does Maslow's theory meet resilience? That's the first part. Does self-actualization enhance resilience?
Absolutely. The second part first. Self-actualization basically means that you're rising beyond and above the mundane. It doesn't mean that the mundane doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that the problems of everyday life don't exist. It's just that you have learned to cope with it. So that is self-actualization. A person who's self-actualized doesn't mean that he's not going to face any challenging situation. It means that he will deal with them differently. In the Abraham Maslow's, the hierarchy of needs, the second one, where the basic physical needs are fulfilled, and then needs of the family are fulfilled, and then your needs of acquiring things are fulfilled. From there starts the emotional resilience, which ultimately leads on to self-actualization.
Thank you, sir. Just wanted to check with you if a mental health professional wants to actually make themselves more aware of, like you said, what are the right ways of meditating, right? I mean, what meditation or what sort of spiritual methods is supposed to be, what sort of spiritual methods are supposed to be offered for particular disorders? How do they get that information, sir? From where can they go know that? Because it is not a part of our integral training. So because the patient says something, we need to know which is the right thing, which is the not the correct thing. So how do we get that information? How does a mental health professional get to know about it?
Well, they can contact Dr. Kailash, who's now the convener of the IPS Religion and Spirituality section. But I understand that it's a very difficult situation, because the needs of the community are very different than what we have been taught. But I think, once you start reading or you start looking at the literature, I can also assure you another thing, and this was something that came to me as a big surprise, that there is a lot of material which is available. And today with the internet, you can always search it. Search under positive psychology and positive psychiatry. Search under spirituality and mental health. What I would do is that when I send you that book, many of the references still hold good. And I'm also going to be sending you the position statement, which has a list of references at the bottom. So that can be a very good starting point. And those are where, not very details are there, but something that you can very acquaint yourself with for a day-to-day function.
Thank you, sir. It was a very enlightening talk, sir. I mean, we were able to feel the patience and the calmness in the way you are talking. It has transferred to some extent, I suppose, to our participants. So I thank you a lot for the talk, sir, and your patient participation in answering the queries of our participants. I also thank Chennai Psychiatric Society and Chettinad Medical College for helping us host this program. We'll be sending the YouTube link and all the material which Sir has promised. I'll be passing on to the participants because I have your email ID and WhatsApp number. Okay, we will meet together another time. Thanks, participants, for your active participations and your eagerness in asking your questions. We will meet some other time with another topic, maybe in the same field or another field.
My thanks to each and every participant for their very, very patient listening and their participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.